A good Erev Shabbos. The fine line, almost impossibly fine line, that separates life from death is the very fine line between last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha. The intense drama, almost too much to bear, is the last aliyah of last week's Sedra, Vayera. It's the Akedah, the binding and near sacrifice of Isaac by his father, Avraham. To reflect on this pivotal moment in human history, as the Siddur allows us to do every day by placing this incident at the center of our prefatory morning prayers, God calls to Avraham to bring his son, his only son, whom he loves, bring him up as an offering on Mount Moriah, the place where God will show him. Avraham hastens to do this and arrives at the mountaintop, prepares to slaughter his son, make a human sacrifice out of him. At the last moment, the very last moment, an angel calls out to Avraham to desist, not to harm the boy or do anything to him, as if enough hadn't already been done. That's a bit of editorializing in telling the story, but I'm still traumatized. A ram is offered in place of Isaac, and each year we sound a shofar made from a ram's horn on Rosh Hashanah and read this passage to absorb it anew. The Torah says enigmatically that after the event, Avraham returned to his men and they returned home, not mentioning that Isaac returned with them. This ambiguity leads down a forked midrashic path. Either Isaac actually was sacrificed, and it just doesn't say, or at least he didn't return home with his father. Perhaps he went somewhere else, maybe to study at the yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever. Either way, father and son part company after this point. And on another level, another father and son part company. Sadly, mysteriously, unsettlingly, God never speaks to Avraham again after this event. Why? Another time. We're allowed a few hours to catch our breath after this harrowing moment, and then at Mincha on Shabbat, would have been Shabbat last week, and again on Monday and Thursday, and the following Shabbat morning, we hear of the life of Sarah, Chayei Sarah. Sarah dies. Why? What? How could that be? It seems that there is no such thing as a victimless act, an act without any costs. In the Torah, the book that's telling us how to live our lives, we understand this. We should understand that there is such a thing as collateral damage. The juxtaposition of the end of last week's Sedra and the beginning of this week's Chayei Sarah would certainly suggest a connection between the Akedah and Sarah's death. Here's a version of the consequences told in Midrash Rabbah. It says there, in Vayikra Rabbah, Avraham did not rejoice in this world, and you seek to rejoice. He had a son at the age of 100, and in the end God said to him, take your son, etc. So Avram took Yitzchak, his son, led him uphill and down dale, up to the top of one mountain, and he built an altar and arranged the wood and took the knife to slaughter him. Were it not that the angel called out from heaven, he would have already been slaughtered. Know that it is so, for Isaac returned to his mother, and she said to him, where have you been, my son? He answered, my father took me uphill and down dale, etc. She said, woe upon the son of the drunken woman. If it had not been for the angel, you would have already been slaughtered. He said, yes. At that she screamed 6 times, corresponding to 6 tekiah notes. She had not finished doing this when she died. As it is written, Avraham came to mourn Sarah and to bewail her. That's the end of the quote from the Midrash. Other versions of this Midrash invoke Satan, the Satan, who tries at every opportunity to foil the unfolding of the Akedah, but this one doesn't mention. It simply narrates the gaps in the narrative, filling in conversations as they might well have transpired. The shock of what happened when Yitzchak returned home and told his mother what he had just gone through was enough to end her life. The truth is more than she can bear. The comparison of Sarah's anguished cries to the sounds of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is meant to draw some redemptive, some positive influence on Jewish history, much as the shofar itself means to evoke the ram that had been offered in place of Yitzchak. It's that whisper-thin thread between what was and what might have been. When she asks for the clarification, if it had not been for the angel, the hair's breadth between life and death becomes too heavy a burden. She takes leave of her senses, or they take leave of her, and Sarah's soul takes leave of her body. And yet this entire parsha carries the name of Sarah, not just that, but the life of Sarah, Chayei Sarah, which cannot be simply a cruel irony. We discussed to no end the notion that Mazari b'chayim, Afhu b'chayim, the Gemara, famous Gemara we refer to frequently from Tainus, which says that as long as one's children continue the legacy, that gives a sort of extension to the parent's life. Certainly the Parsha's detailed recountings of the origins of the Jewish people in Yitzchak and Rivka's meeting and marriage is a nachas and really a continuation of Sarah's vision for life in every sense. Perhaps clouding over this portion of our history, though, if not all of it, is the awareness that Sarah attained in the last moments of her life. How fragile is the separation between life and death. This past week marked the first yahrzeit of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Harav Yaakov Tzvi ben David Aryeh Zechronu Livracha, taken from us last year really at the height of his powers, at the peak of his capability to write and speak and help us see the developments in our world through a Torah lens. At the early age of 72, which seems younger and younger all the time, this loss brought shockingly and painfully to the forefront of our awareness the fragility of life and its tenuousness. For those who took the opportunity, and I believe it's on the internet, on the OU website, you can still see it, there was a program to commemorate Rabbi Sacks' life and its impact with the rabbi of the Lincoln Square Synagogue in Manhattan. Rabbi Robinson is a Glaswegian and served as a campus and shul rabbi in the UK before coming to America. He knew Rabbi Sacks as his chief rabbi in the United Synagogue and talked of his caring mentorship and leadership of the rabbis in the UK in his tenure as chief. Dr. Erica Brown is an author and teacher whose work we've studied here in our shul, who wrote her master's thesis under Rabbi Sacks' direction at the University of London. She spoke about his encouraging her to pursue a doctorate and her career in teaching Jewish texts. The executive director of the OU spoke about knowing Rabbi Sacks from afar, and the moderator of the panel, who directs the OU's lobbying office in Washington, D.C., spoke about those times when Rabbi Sacks would visit the Kemp Mill Synagogue in Silver Spring, and how he would speak first to a standing room only crowd and still find time to sit at the Kiddush with the bar or bat mitzvah, boy or girl, and make sure they felt like they were the center of attention. There are a number of insights to share from another of the panelists, our friend, our teacher, Rabbi Jj Schachter, who has visited here at KST on several occasions. He is still visibly shaken by this loss, as he and Rabbi Sacks had been on many panels together in both North America and in the UK. They'd spent Shabbat at each other's tables, spent Shabbos afternoons together at various other Shabbatonim events over 4 decades. Rabbi Schachter said he was unaware that Rabbi Sacks was sick, much less that he had had previous bouts, 2 of them, with cancer. But late last year in the summer, Rabbi Schachter had a friend in New Jersey who was terminally ill. Not a famous person, but a very good Jew, a wonderful Jew, he said, who lived with every book, every parsha sheet, every video lecture of Rabbi Sacks. The man just lived in Rabbi Sacks' Torah. And as this fellow lay dying, he shared a regret with Rabbi Schachter that he had never spoken person to person with Rabbi Sacks. Rabbi Schachter called the London office and explained to the office manager the story, and the very next morning Rabbi Sacks called this man who was about to leave this world and whose last wish was simply to talk with his teacher that he had known from a distance but had never exchanged words with directly. After the call was over, the man showed deep satisfaction and he said, "Okay, I'm ready to die now." It was just a month later that Rabbi Sacks himself passed away, yet he found time to do this kindness for someone else. Another incident Rabbi Schachter recounted was Rabbi Sacks' explanation of why he had never written about his encounters with cancer that threatened and ultimately took his life. Rabbi Sacks explained that he had watched his own father deal with his final illness with complete faith. Rabbi Sacks said that his father was not someone who had very much formal Jewish education, but he was someone who had total emunah, total and complete faith in God. Rabbi Sacks watched his father say Tehillim, Psalms, as he was dying, and his father said, "I know that if God wants my time here to be over, he will take me. And if he thinks that I still have more to accomplish here, then he will take care of me. I put my trust in him. Rabbi Sachs related this, and he said, I did the very same. If God had things for me to do here, he will make sure I'm here to do them. When it's my time, it will come. He said this was not a theological question for me, because we say it every morning in Adon Olam. Biyado afkid ruchi. I put my soul in his hand. I have faith. Full stop. In the past year, we've tried to absorb the loss of a great teacher in Israel, really a great teacher to the world, not only in his shul in Golders Green or Marble Arch, but in Parliament and in 10 Downing and in the European Parliament and the Vatican and the BBC and the Templeton Lecture and the Wreath Lecture and the books and the Internet and in Canterbury, where he was granted an honorary Doctor of Divinity. We were supported by a whole year's worth of Parsha talks, which Rabbi Sachs so lovingly prepared for us, as he learned that his end was near, but before he shared that news with us. Like Chayei Sarah, where the influence and the impact of Sarah's life continues ever stronger after her passing, perhaps we will continue to be inspired by Rabbi Sachs' teachings and perspective and call to action and learning even more in the aftermath of his passing. A movement is afoot to form a global Rabbi Sachs reading group with Jews around the world reading his books together. At KST, we've already been practicing for this for years. We also recognize from losses of beloved family members and teachers whom we've lost in the past year and more, the tenuousness and the fragility of life. The point in telling the story of Rav Sachs calling the dying man was, in Rabbi Schachter's telling of it, the important point of how much impact we can have on the lives of others simply through small acts of kindness. Let us rededicate ourselves to learning, to living with all the strength we have, and hope and pray that God gives us all long and healthy years to accomplish our task here on earth. Ultimately, as we say every morning in Adon Olam, I put my soul in his hands. Biyado afkid ruchi. In Rabbi Sachs' formulation, I have faith. Full stop. Good Shabbos.